I would sell this for like 240.
Oh shit!
Yeah.
Hello，大家好，这里是维，我是一名纽约的植物博主。那么今天我们来到了一个在纽约自己做培育非常稀有植物的一个卖家这里，他是我朋友的哥哥。那这是 Kevin。那我们接下来聊一聊呢，就是种植物在纽约能不能赚钱这个事情，我们就深入的去来问 Kevin 一些。他作为一个卖家，他所了解到的在纽约售卖植物的这一些 insider 的一些信息。So Kevin, so how do you started to get into plants and actually selling plants?
I think that before I used to really be interested in growing plants. So I used to collect like specific rare plants. So like something like this, like an album,
Yeah.
maybe like 4 years ago, it was like, it was still rare, but it wasn't that rare, like hard to find. So I was slowly collecting before the pandemic. And then when the pandemic started, I think that's when everything started taking more momentum.
Oh, yeah, that prices perk up.
People started getting more interested. And at least during that time, I had my own small collection. So
Maybe
I
we
saw
can
that there was so much momentum and people being interested in the area that I thought about like, okay, this is a perfect opportunity to A, make money, and B, do something that you like. I knew that eventually I wanted to make my money back,
Yes.
my investment back, obviously,
yeah.
and more if you're spending so much money buying a $1,000 plant, right? So I think during that time, I focused specifically on getting variety of plants.
Yes.
So I focus on buying small cuttings of different type of plants with the idea of being able to propagate them eventually and sell and make my money back. So I believe during the pandemic, I might have spent like $5,000 to maybe $7,000. My suggestion to people who are starting, it's like if you're able to buy a plant just paying a little bit more, I would probably go that way than just like going through cuttings. Cuttings has a lot of like
risk involved behind
yeah,
it.
involved with it. So
What platform do you use, or do you sell it on like social media, or do you sell directly on websites? And
so before, I used to be very active. So for anyone who's starting this sort of like business, I would really suggest people to join their local communities in terms of like Facebook groups.
I see.
There's a lot of people who are looking to learn more about growing tropical plants, growing rare plants.
Yeah.
So I would say like joining a group that might might expose you to possible clients and people that are knowledgeable about the area will help you learn the material and learn like how to take care of certain plants, what are the parameters, watering, like how are you nutrient solutions, stuff like that. So that's going to be one thing. The second thing is that a lot of new people keep joining these groups every day. And just like you were at some point, they're also trying to start their collection. So they're perfect people for you to sell to.
so as a beginner collector, I look into plants that are more cheaper price, like 50 and unders. And as we're looking at all the plant that is on the table right now, you can see like a lot of these can go over $100 easily, right? How is the market business going for you for all of these?
I think it depends. There's a market for every type of person. I would say like something like a plant like this big, it's going to be hard to be sold as one piece. So for example, I believe like last year I could sell something like this for like $1,000 or more,
crazy.
like very easily. So time has gone by and the quantities of products, so like plants, cuttings, has increased significantly. So obviously price would drop, but I believe there's a market for everyone depending on who you're speaking to.
Yes.
But so far, what I think sells the best, it's like smaller cuttings of like plants or small rooted plants, like something like this might be an easy sell.
Yeah.
Easier than something like this.
Kevin also, work as full-time engineer. So how do you manage this time to take care of? As I can see right now, we can go through the room, we can see around over 100 plants.
Yeah.
So how do you manage to actually take care of all and make sure they're healthy and?
That's a great question. I think that plants compared to other like things that you might raise, like I don't know, like fish or like other animals in general, are much easier. So I would say I spend maybe like once a week, like maybe 1 or 2 hours. And you can do that like spread out throughout the week, like 15 minutes here, 15 minutes there, half an hour or an hour, do it all one shot. I believe that it's always easier to do a little every day, so that it's just easier for you to do.
Yeah.
But I believe it's just having a schedule in terms of what you want to do. So I would separate my care into 3 different parts. So the first one, it's like watering. Like how often do I need to water? And that's going to be dependent from person to person. at least in my setup, I can water like every 2 weeks, for
Yeah.
example. And you'll probably show them why, because a lot of my plants have, they're actually being grown in a semi-hydro substrate.
Yeah.
So a lot of them have a reservoir of water, which means that I don't have to water so often, like other
Yeah.
people that might have to water like every other
Every
week
week, yeah.
or every 3 days, right? So for me, it works every 2 weeks.
I see.
In terms of propagations, a lot of the times you'll see like all of these plants are actually pretty big. I was thinking about chopping all of them
Yeah.
to like scratch, but I knew that you were coming, so
Yeah.
I thought about, okay, let's
Yeah.
just keep something so that it's actually presentable and it looks
Yeah.
more interesting. So yeah, but a lot of the second part of me, it's like I always believe that it's important to propagate. Why is it important? Because you never know, something might happen to your only plant that cost you so much,
And then you just lost them.
once it dies, you don't have anything to
Yeah.
like have. I'm not sure if you have yet experienced this, but pests
Pests.
that are not visible to
Yeah,
your eye
if you
are
have-
really hard to manage. So things like thrips, spider mites.
Oh yeah.
So
I have experience with spider mite with my alocasia. I just throw it
Yes.
away.
yes. So sometimes it's easier to just throw the plant away than
Yeah.
trying to save
But
it.
for
But
situation
then
like this,
when your plants are expensive, you don't want to throw it away. So
Yeah.
you'll probably do everything. So I think
what are one tip for you for you to deal with pests?
So I think it depends. The first thing that you want to consider is like identification. What is the pest, right? Like many times it might be simple stuff like maybe like spider mite, just washing the plant using
Yeah.
like some sort of soap solution with
Yeah.
neem oil might help. But then if it's something different than spider mites, you might need to utilize a different method. So you might be,
So have
it
to do
depends on
research
which
on it.
track you might want
I
to go.
see.
Do you want to go through kind of like the organic? Are you going for like, I don't know, beneficials, nematodes? Are you going for actual, like you want to kill them throughout time, or you want to kill them one shot? In my opinion, I think the best thing is just to kill them all in one shot. So you'll probably have to use some sort of pesticide.
I see.
So that's just something to consider. It depends what you want to use the money, right?
I see. So for you, is it like 50 local, 50-50 local? Or
It
50 online and
depends. I
local?
feel at the moment I have enough stock to kind of like supply. It's not like I sell every day through Etsy. So far, I think my operations have been sufficient. But ideally, in some months, I might have like, I would say 50-50. It might be a
50-50,
good.
okay.
For example, some other months it might be more 60 to 70 local versus
Okay.
30% Etsy. The only other thing about selling through these type of platforms is that a lot of times you'll have to pay fees associated to using the platform. So for example, I know in Etsy, they take about 10% of your total sale.
So do you
if
charge a little bit higher on Etsy as well?
Yes, usually in comparison to locally, because I'll probably need to make that money in another way.
Yeah.
So you usually charge maybe a little premium for selling online, so you can recoup that money that you're spending on pay on fees.
Yes.
And for Etsy, for example, it's about 10%, I would say, about that much that they'll be taking. So if you sell something for 100, they'll take $10 out of you.
It's actually much easier to grow like common house plant like the monsteras or like any other acacia you can find in your local shop. And as we can see here, that all the plant that you have here has all kind of variegations and these kind of plant, some more easier to grow, some more harder to grow. Then what are the risk that is associated with this kind of rare plant that you are growing, in your household?
I think like a lot of the times it's important to understand the growing pattern of the plant.
Yes.
And understand like where maybe the next node or the next new sleeve is going to be coming from, right? A lot of the things that you'll realize with these type of plants is that they have something called chimeric variegation. So it means that it's very random how it might come, right? You can see a pattern through the way in which the leaves are growing, but a lot of the time it's going to be random. So what do I mean by random? This is a really well variegated leaf, but if you notice, it's almost like a half moon, right?
Yeah.
So assuming I decided to cut on one side, it might come out on the fully variegated side, right? Which is going to give me something like this, right? Even though it's very pretty, this is not sellable.
It's not gonna grow, right?
Why is it not sellable? Because it's not gonna grow anything out of it, right? Because it's basically a suicidal leaf. Even though it's very pretty, this is not gonna last more than a week or
Yes.
2 weeks after being cut.
Okay.
So, and the reason for that is because obviously it's not producing any chlorophyll, any
Yeah.
energy for the plant, so it's just gonna die. So I think it's important to understand growing patterns and seeing where to cut, because your last cut might determine the new growth. So on the perfect example about a half moon, let's assume this was fully green, and then this side's like fully yellow. If the node was on this side, right, it will grow only green.
Only green.
Even though this plant it's supposed to have the variegation, even though it's coming from a variegated plant. And that's when we call a plant has reverted, meaning that it has gone back to its original status,
I see.
right? So I might get only fully green, or I might get fully yellow. And both of them are not going to sell.
Oh,
right?
if it's in the middle, then it's most likely going to
Yes, that's correct. So in the middle, you'll get something like this.
I see.
More like kind of like marble. You have both colors. That's the ideal state. Even though half moons are pretty, though they are not really the best propagation material in my opinion.
Let's go to the numbers. All right, people are more curious about like the numbers that we talk about here, like the profit here.
Maybe between 1,000 to like 3,000.
In a month?
In a month, yeah.
Oh, it's good income, like outside of your job, actually.
Yeah, it's a good income to do.
Yeah.
So it depends, right? But again, it's really, I would say it's very cyclical also, the business. A lot of people prefer not to buy during winter months, obviously because of the cold.
Yeah, it's very,
There's a lot of risk of rotting
Yeah.
plants, stuff like that. So more people tend to buy during the spring in my opinion. Spring and fall are usually good times. Summer, not so much because, again, if you're shipping somewhere where it reaches 100 degrees 5 days a week, it's going to be harder for the plants. So a lot of people also tend to not buy during those times. But
So here we're going to come with last question, and we're going to ask Kevin, do you suggest people, maybe just a beginner plant lover or someone who just got into plants to actually start some business like this? And, you know, do this market still have enough buyer to actually for you to be in this business?
I think it depends, right? I believe right now the market's a little bit oversaturated because a lot of people joined during the pandemic. So if you think about it, I think the best time was to start before the pandemic.
Too late.
The most money was made during the pandemic, and prices have dropped since then. That doesn't mean that you're not able to start. I believe the country, and more if you're willing to sell outside of the US, not outside of the US, within the US, meaning outside of your city. I mean, that you'll probably have to ship. I believe there's a big pool of people that are always open to like buy from you. And more if you have a good product and competitive prices. I think those are the most important things. If I was to start now, I believe yes. I believe it's always a good time to start, honestly.
Okay.
I think you just need to make sure that you're getting prices, plants at a competitive price, so meaning that you're not overspending. Because remember that all of these are living beings, so it might take them a while to get to a point where you might be able to propagate, right? Honestly, I think that this type of hobby, plants thrive more without you than with your help.
Oh, yeah.
Because we tend to overwater,
Overwater.
over-fertilize, over everything.
I do that all the time.
So I think it's better. They thrive in neglect. I think that's expression. But again, I would say go for common stuff, but are also rare. Monstera albo, Monstera aurea, Florida Beauty. I think that's a good one. Strawberry Shake is also good. However, I have noticed that it reverts very easily, and the variegation is not as consistent as with other plants like Florida Beauty, in my opinion.
Okay.
Monstera aurea. There was a point where Monstera adansonii variegated, the variegated version, was really expensive. Nowadays, it's not that expensive, but it's important to have variety, right? So you don't want to only have one type. You want to have different eggs in different nests, so you are always able to sell to other people, right? Don't try to focus on one specific type of plant, and just try to have as much variety. I think that's the key to having a lot of sales.